but I'm delighted to see, I think we have a good showing of faculty and staff and students, I think. So we're, this is the inaugural seminar in this new seminar series that we've started as a department. It's kind of has a working title of Societal Impacts of MAE, of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, but really this is, the goal of this is to give students, faculty, and staff a chance to sort of take a step back and more broadly think about and learn about and discuss, the role of mechanical and aerospace engineers, and really engineering as a field of practice, end of education, think about our role in society. And of course, it's a two-way street, right? The engineers have a tremendous potential to make an impact on society, but society also has an impact on engineering as a field and as education discipline. So the goal of this seminar series is to just think more broadly about that, learn more broadly about that, just try to better understand the role of engineers in society and how we can move forward and make improvements in our discipline and make a positive impact on society. So we're delighted to have Professor Leroy Long here as our inaugural speaker. He's an alum, and I'm going to turn it over to Professor Srinivasan to introduce him.
Thanks, Carlos. It's my distinct pleasure to have Leroy give our MAE seminar this week, and this first speaker in the series. I guess I've known Leroy for about 10 years now, approximately, let's say. Leroy had got his undergrad from Wright State University, an hour from here in Dayton. We were fortunate enough to have him as a grad student for his master's in the mechanical engineering program. And he went on to do a PhD in STEM education at Ohio State as well, and a relatively short PhD, I guess. Then immediately joined Embry-Riddle University as an assistant professor in their engineering fundamentals program, where he's been teaching a variety of courses in engineering and design, and has been shaping future engineers there. Please thank Leroy for joining us today, and welcome him to this talk.
Definitely, thanks for having me, especially given everything that's going on in the world right now. I'm just, blessed to be healthy, to be able to interact with you all through this virtual space using technology. I will say I kind of have mixed feelings about being here, just in terms of reflecting back on some of my experiences. Manoj was certainly one of the highlights of my time at Ohio State, specifically in the mechanical engineering department, which merged with aerospace during my time there, and now it's MAE. But there were some negative kind of experiences, even though I was successful on paper. Some of the people I mentioned today were successful as well. So again, that's the mixed feelings I have. But hopefully we'll come out of this with a positive outlook on how we can make the situation better. And so by the title of Buoyant Believers, it means individuals who are confident and resilient. So I'll touch on that later. And so I'm saying they were confident, resilient, they were successful, but they were bruised. And so what does it mean to just survive in engineering as a Black man rather than to have opportunity to thrive? So that's the nature of my talk. I also want to give credit to Trevion Henderson, who's an alum of Ohio State and worked with me when I initially was collecting this data set. Same for Joseph Kitchen. Trevion actually got a degree in engineering. Joey, as he likes to be called, he got a degree with me in the College of Education in terms of a PhD. So if you're a person who likes to use technology, especially social media, I always give you the opportunity to follow me, to tweet during the talk. I'll give you a couple opportunities in terms of potential hashtags. You could do hashtag Black in Engineering. There is an organization specific to that cause as well, in case you want to at them or at me, and then hashtag Buoyant Believers. So if you do feel led to tweet something during the talk or even after, my handle is just Dr. Leroy Long III, and then you could also use at Black BLK in engineering, and you can use hashtag Black in Engineering or hashtag Buoyant Believers. All right, so Manoj introduced me, but I wanted to start with a broader positionality just to make sure you understand where I'm coming from. We all have biases. So in quantitative and qualitative research, engineering education research, technical engineering research like mechanical, aerospace, we all have biases. And many times I think researchers do not acknowledge where they come from and how that informs, you know, the study they choose to undertake, the results, their perception of those results, and how they share them with the world. And so I just want to be open and transparent about it. And so I'm originally born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, which, as Manoj says, is an hour and a half from Columbus. And so Dayton, if you're not aware, is the birthplace of aviation. So the Wright brothers, who are credited with inventing flight, although there are some people who credit a Brazilian with discovering it around the same time. So I don't want to lean towards my own bias and saying it had to be the Wright brothers. They were the only potential ones, but certainly noteworthy. So that influenced my interest in aviation and engineering from a young age. I did go to Wright State University, which is like 20 to 30 minutes outside of Dayton. I was exposed to engineering as a middle schooler through a summer enrichment program. Graduated from there, came straight to Ohio State after getting an undergraduate in mechanical engineering to continue that pursuit for a master's degree, thinking I really would just go work back in industry. But when I was there, I started to fall in love with teaching through a teaching position I had. And then I met Manoj, started to enjoy research as well, which you can see in the middle with me with that equipment from a study that we did. There's a journal article on it. If you're interested, you can find that on my site or probably Manoj's as well. And as I mentioned, I enjoy teaching. So right here, a Math for Engineers course that I helped pilot at Ohio State and then I brought to my current institution. So research and teaching, that love was there. And then somehow they got me to think about a potential PhD. So I learned about a combination of engineering, education, and psychology. And I decided to blend those together when I heard about a PhD in STEM education with a focus on engineering education. And so that's kind of my final point. And then I went off to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. So ironically, I'm from the birthplace of aviation and now working at an aerospace aviation focused school with a name in terms of the city that's very close to Dayton. It's just Dayton with the A, Daytona Beach. So kind of odd the way, you know, things work in terms of birth origin and access and all those things. So again, I'm very blessed. By no means do I say I deserve this platform. I think it's kind of like Oprah Winfrey's quote, where luck is preparation meeting opportunity. So I certainly worked hard, prepared in ways that I was able to, but I needed access. And I need opportunity to be able to go to Ohio State. I need opportunity to be able to work with Manoj and to be able to get this faculty position. So definitely some privilege that many people encounter. Mine was a little bit more of an advantage, I would say, but I don't take any of those for granted. So any questions for me before we go into kind of an activity? So any questions?
I was going to ask, you want to wait to get into this later, but I was just kind of curious if you could talk a little bit more about what drove your transition to think about engineering education, you know, switching from mechanical engineering as a master's to the more education-focused PhD. And if you want to wait till the end to address that, that's fine too.
No, I can say it now. So again, when I got to Ohio State, my funding opportunity initially was through a teaching position. I had never taught before outside of, you know, like tutoring, things of that sort. But I was actually in charge of a recitation, which was like a, kind of a differential equations course, but with MATLAB. So I was responsible for the recitations for that. Then I switched over to the first year engineering program. I was doing labs, class for it as well. But I fell in love with teaching through those experiences. And I was like, yeah, I enjoy engineering and the technical side of it. I enjoy research, but teaching is like a strong motivator for me, you know, to want to do this at a higher level. And then the research interest started to grow along with that through working with Manoj and then my advisors for my PhD, Dr. Terrell Strayhorn and Dr. Paul Post. They are my co-advisors. So I'm working with them. So the research is building up. I still had a toss-up though, administration, faculty route, but I knew I wanted to help people who look like me, and I didn't see myself represented well amongst students or faculty. And so I thought if I go back in industry, I don't think I'll have as much of an impact. Even from administration side, I didn't see administrators, or at least what I would consider staff members who sometimes are administrators, having the power of like a tenured faculty member. And so I had opportunity to become a tenured faculty member, and I feel like to do things that blend my interests, which are engineering, education, and psychology, and I went with it. I also have a goal of starting a STEM-based school, so that's something that still motivates me as well. So any other questions so far? Great. So I am pretty engaging in person. It's a little difficult, you know, from a virtual setting to move around and engage you, but I'll do my best. And so one way I thought we could engage with one another is through a Google kind of platform. It's called a Jamboard. And so basically it's like a whiteboard. So I'll switch to that. And what it gives you opportunity to do if you use this icon in the middle is to post a sticky note. And so I'm just asking you to respond to 2 prompts. So why you came to the talk today, you can say you had to, you know, something interests you about it, whatever your truth is about why you came. And then what are your experiences like with Black men? So the Black men you've met, you can name them by position, personality type, whatever comes to mind for you for either of these 2. If you can add your thoughts, and I'll switch to that Jamboard.
Leroy, just to let you know, I looks like I still have to request access to edit. I'm able to get to the Jamboard, but it's still asking me to request. It's on a view only right now. I don't know if other people are able to.
Sorry about that. It should be up to date now.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I tried to keep it private at first, just so if I put it out, people wouldn't not know how to work it. But yeah, I'm glad you're able to now. So then you can use the icon in the middle on the left. It looks like a piece of paper. That's a sticky note you can post. If you prefer just to write on it, you can do that as well. There are options with the pen. Also a text box, whatever is most convenient for you. So again, 2 prompts I came to this talk to, and the Black men I've met are, so it looks like one person's getting extra credit, which is always a good thing. I tend to give my students a lot of extra credit opportunities, really so they never get bored with the curriculum and they show that I do value when they go above and beyond. So one person specifically wants to learn more about the experiences of Black men in engineering, which is good to hear.
Hey, Professor Long, do you have the link available that you could put in the chat window, please?
Yes, I can post it again in the Zoom chat.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like Manoj reposted it.
Got it, thanks.
And so it's actually something I just learned about myself. David Lane, who works in the engineering education department at Ohio State, he used it in a recent talk last week. And I know I was looking for a way to virtually engage people, so it's perfect timing for me. And kudos to someone at your own institution for helping me learn how to use it. So people wanting to learn about diverse experiences, extra credit. I'm not sure what SMART is representing. Oh, okay, those are for the Black men you've met. So that makes more sense. So maybe this one is probably over there too. Friendly, outgoing, smart, driven, kind, laid back, resilient. And so I think it's pretty cool that we're able to, you know, all see each other's thoughts too, pop up in a live setting. And just to gain different perspectives, right? You know, we come in with our own biases, our own lived experience, but you don't necessarily always know what motivates and drives other people. So I think that's something that's always helpful. And I think because we're in the STEM and technology space, it shows the power of technology. So we spend a lot of time and energy, you know, on these topics. But we can see the benefits of them from this talk to even maybe engaging with our family in a fun way. I know I've had Zoom sessions with my family during this time. You could find other uses for it even outside of your job. Someone wanting to know how to better support Black students. I appreciate that. Actually wanting to apply what you hear. It being interesting, at least the topic. More about Black men being brave, brilliant, having grits, being funny, real good friends with some, resilience, very good at hiding the hurdles they face, helpful. Passionate.
So it looks like, sorry, Leroy, to interrupt. It looks like the the board has reached the limit of first users. So maybe I'm going to suggest that if people want to respond, rather than the board, you can just respond in the chat window so that other people can see what you're thinking as well.
Yeah, that's great that we maxed out. I'm pleasantly surprised that that occurred.
Yeah.
So any other thoughts before we transition on maybe why you came to the talk or what your previous experiences have been like with Black men? Looks like maybe some people may post in the chat. Okay. Underestimated is a newer one for Black men that I see. Someone wanted to know how to help Black men start from the high school stage. I saw that one. How you can make a difference specifically as a faculty member. You ever just learn. All right, well, you can feel free to keep adding. I'll come back to this before I transition to the next one, but I'll go back to the presentation for a moment, just for the sake of time. All right, so that's where we all are. I named my positionality. Now you tell me where you come from in this discussion, like why you're here, what your experience has been like with Black men to this date. I'll just tell you a little bit more about the inspiration behind it. So there's a very popular play called A Raisin in the Sun, and I'll show a short clip from it. And that inspired a book chapter called Buoyant Believers, which was in a book called The Evolving Challenges of Black College Students. My co-advisor, Dr. Terrell Strahan, wrote the book chapter and coined the term Buoyant Believer while studying or undertaking a study that involved low-income African-American men. So I'll try to play this. For some reason, if it's delayed or not working, I'll just kind of tell you, but it did work earlier. So it may not be meant for me to play it because for some reason it's not coming up, and it's even showing like a snippet of the Jamboard rather than the YouTube video link. I think I have it posted, so I can always try to find it and play it there. But basically, it's from the actual play. And so what the leading character, well, it looks like it's coming up now, so I'll just let it play.
There's always something left to love. Have you cried for that boy today? Now, I don't mean for yourself and for the family because we lost the money. I mean for him and what he's gone through. And God help him. God help him what it's done to him. Child, when do you think is the time to love somebody the most? When he's done good and made things easy for everybody. No, that ain't the time at all. It's when he's at his lowest and he can't believe in himself because the world's done whipped him so. When you starts measuring somebody, measure 'em right, child. Measure 'em right. You make sure that you done taken into account the hills and the valleys he's come through to get to wherever he is.
Basically, the reason I wanted to play that clip is so you get an idea of what we're hoping to inspire, which is a bit of empathy. So I think at times we always want people to make our lives easier. You look at someone like myself, you may say I'm making the university look good, making the department look good because I've succeeded, quote unquote. But what about if I hadn't? You know, if I had flunked out of Ohio State, or if I had left the faculty ranks, or if I had just talked about the negative aspect of my experiences and encounters, would you show love to me in that instance? And that's really what we're trying to get at towards some of the Black men who I'm going to bring up today. Are you willing to empathize with them, to show love and support, and not to only care about them when they're serving your own purposes? Also in the clip, that's from the original version. There are two other ones, or at least two others, that you can look up online if you want to watch it. And she's also using what's considered like Black talk. Some people use Ebonics. There's a good book called Talking and Testifying. It doesn't have the G's at the end. So Talking, Talkin, and Testifying, again, without the G. But it talks about the origins of Black language and Black talk. And rather than it being viewed in a negative light, it talks about the intellectual capabilities of being able to combine African languages with English, especially at a time when Blacks were denied access to read and write, and how it's evolved over time. All right, and so I would just encourage you to check that out if you haven't. It may change your own biases or views about different ways in which people talk. Another motivation behind this story or this overall study is what I consider to be a positive way of looking at people, which from a theoretical standpoint is called anti-deficit lens or anti-deficit approach. And so rather than saying, again, why do people fail? What's wrong with Black men? What's wrong with Black students? We look at how they succeeded, all right? And despite any obstacles or circumstances they may face, this actual paper and theory came out of Sean Harper, who's known in higher education for doing a lot of positive work and inspirational studies really with Black men from across the country. So that's the context behind it. You really want to know the purpose. I think there aren't enough studies that have looked at success strategies for Black men, specifically in STEM fields like engineering. So that was one motivator. And another one was testing out this conceptual framework, which we call Buoyant Believers, while combining self-efficacy and resilience. And so the pictures I've shown here are Black men I've mentored or worked specifically with. One who obtained a PhD, 3 others undergrad degrees in my institution, and 1 undergrad degree at the University of Central Florida. Now, ironically, one other thing we have to mention when we talk about Black men is that just like Black people, there isn't just one way that we should represent Black men. And Black men are not a monolith, right? So ironically, all of these Black men have an international origin. And if it's not them, meaning they haven't come from an international country, their parents came from an international setting. And so if I had only done a study involving these Black men, it would not include the experiences of African-American men. So it's important for us to distinguish who are we talking about and how are their experiences really telling a broader story, or maybe just an in-depth study for that specific individual. All right, so we can go back to the Jamboard again. This time I want to hear your thoughts on why you think Black men succeed in engineering and why Black men leave in engineering, and then I'll give you some information from previous literature. So again, we can go back to the Jamboard, why Black men succeed in engineering and why they leave engineering. And that'll be the second tab on the Jamboard, so switch it here. So why do Black men succeed in engineering and why do Black men leave engineering? Just your thoughts. So determination popped up for success. And if you're unable to use the Jamboard, you can always unmute your mic and share. You can post in the chat and share as well. We don't want you to feel like your voice is silenced. Someone else said they came today to learn more about diversity. They're motivated in terms of Black men they've met. But again, if you're unable to post, you can feel free to put your thoughts in the chat or to unmute your mic. A lot of people are talking about grit, hard work, mentors, leaving for lack of support, underrepresentation, feeling isolated. Looks like don't feel welcome also should be over there. Personal drive for a reason, being hardworking, dedicated, passionate, have specific goals. Lacking sense of belonging being a reason Black men leave, which falls in line with feeling isolated. So it looks like a lot of good thoughts here, a lot of background stress, certainly the case. Lack of support. The circumstances are unmotivating, maybe something going on in their home life that's stressful. Getting input from society, maybe the media, implicit biases. Their reasons they stay, they're intelligent, their unique perspective, they have drive, high motivation, their skill, they want to change something in education. They already have resilience from their day-to-day lives, racism being the reason they leave. They didn't have an early foundation in terms of education. Systemic adversity. Okay, so all good ones. You can continue to post. I'm going to go back to the presentation just so we can continue to make progress in terms of time. but feel free to continue to post and share your thoughts. And so I'll tell you what the literature says, and you can kind of situate your thoughts with what I'll share from the literature. Also, maybe one more perspective on Zoom, hardworking, certainly the case. So in terms of review of literature, there's not a lot of work that's actually looked at Black men specifically within the context of engineering or even STEM holistically. So a lot of the work in general dealing with engineering education has been at the undergraduate level or the K through 12 level. Less work with community colleges, less work with industry, less work with graduate school. And then when we start to look at student populations, less work with underrepresented groups, less work within underrepresented groups, focusing on Black students. And part of that may be because you don't have a lot of Black faculty like myself in position to do this, or people who are not Black who feel empowered to do so. But one person at your institution who I want to highlight is Dr. James Moore. He actually has done a lot of work, started his dissertation focusing on Black men in engineering, and came up with a theory called Prove Them Wrong. And so that theory said that one reason Black men were successful is they were out to prove negative stereotypes were wrong concerning what they were capable of doing. And so that actually motivated them to work harder. We didn't necessarily talk about the cost of that hard work, but there is a Black woman named Ebony McGee at Vanderbilt. She's talked about that and inspired me to focus specifically this talk on that as well. So yeah, we can succeed. It looks good on paper, but at what cost at times? What are the bruises that happen along the way? So I'll just highlight those two individuals. There are many, many more. So I don't want to pretend that I'm going to take the time to highlight all of them, but I want to highlight those two individuals. You can also check out my website and research page for additional work I've done on the topic. In terms of academic self-efficacy, there's actually a theory. And so the weird thing about the theory is it started back in the 70s, if not prior to that, in terms of the work. And we in engineering, specifically like a field like mechanical engineering, we will highlight and recognize, the first law of thermodynamics or theories with statics and dynamics and physics and so many other subject areas that we deem relevant. But why is it that we don't honor theories that deal with human behavior, human performance? And so one theory that's been around, as I mentioned, for decades now, a lifetime really for some individuals, is self-efficacy theory. And so it basically is saying that we need opportunities to show mastery, right? So in engineering, if I'm getting 40s, 50s, and 60s on my first exams, and I'm not saying it always occurs in engineering, it could be outside in physics, math, chemistry. Am I able to show mastery and develop confidence, or what is called self-efficacy? Vicarious experience, if I don't see Black people who look like me as faculty, staff members, higher level students in terms of class rank, can I see them and learn from their experiences and become confident or have self-efficacy? Verbal persuasion, if I encounter implicit bias, right, negative comments and feedback from my professors, or just an overall lack of verbal encouragement, am I going to have self-efficacy or confidence? Physiological state, right? If I'm under intense amount of stress or experiencing racism, same for emotional state. If I'm depressed, right, anxious, these things actually affect learning. There's science behind it. It affects learning in a negative way if it's not done properly. And so we need to make sure that we're not problematizing Black men or any other groups that are not successful at university. We're looking at the environment and seeing whether there's something in the environment, something we're doing to help or hurt their ability to become confident. Same is true for resilience. Also heavily studied in the literature, been around for quite some time. I will just say the term grit can be problematic at times because grit assumes that certain students do not already possess resilience. It's almost assuming they're not coming into college with it, and we need to focus on it. We need to help them build it. Where if you look at the paper I wrote for this topic, lessons learned about Black male buoyant believers, specifically successful ones, you'll see that they already came in with high levels of resilience and self-efficacy. And then buoyant believers is new, not really anything that's been put out in the literature besides the two papers that I've submitted for publication. All right, so any thoughts or questions before I move on about what's already been studied, what we already know? So it looks like there may be one in the chat. Just said it was informative, so I appreciate that.
Lira, when you said verbal persuasion, I guess that could also be positive.
It could be positive. So you could certainly encourage a student. You could, do you provide qualitative feedback on assignments? I know sometimes I would just get grades like, 70, 80, 90. And even if it were high, it's not telling me what I did to receive that A. So you could even say, great job. with connecting X to Z, right? Or your questions in class are really engaging and helpful. So we can offer positive, reinforcement of behavior, or just things to let someone know you deem them to be intelligent, you deem them to be hardworking. And so you're encouraging that and rewarding it through even a verbal comment. Right? And the same is true, of course, for negative ones. So we need to keep that in mind as well, just to be conscious and cautious with our words. Right, any other thoughts as we're transitioning to the conceptual model? All right, so I will admit another reason I have mixed feelings about this talk. I have not used the Buoyant Believers framework in a number of years because when we first introduced it, we were somewhat disappointed with some of the responses we got from non-Black reviewers, non-Black readers, and we felt like they were using the framework to blame Black men. And so I know I gave a talk at Clemson University, and I'm not trying to single them out. I also spoke at the American Society of Engineering Education and then published through their venue. And when I asked there, without offering any data, just like, what do you think your average student is? Confident and resilient. Confident but lacks resilience. Resilient but lacks confident. Lacks both. There were a lot of people putting their students in the baller or blamers category. Meaning if you're a baller, all right, you'll bounce back because you're resilient, but your confidence is low. So you keep bouncing back, but you're not really going anywhere because you're not confident. A blamer, you're so confident, but you're not resilient that it must be the professor's fault. And so I was somewhat discouraged to not hear faculty say they feel like most of their students are actually confident and resilient, especially when you are at a university, which many of ours have 80, 90% retention rates. And so many of our students are going beyond the first year, they're graduating. Why are they not labeled Buoyant Believers? And so if you don't think that the majority of your students, certainly I would be concerned about how you might view Black students given the negative media perceptions and just racialized biases that exist in society. So that was one thing that caused me to pause with doing this research. Also, the assumption that being confident and resilient is good enough, right? And that if you are confident and resilient, you should automatically succeed and automatically want to stay in engineering. I think those are very limited assumptions. And we should be careful about assuming, again, that because someone's confident and they're resilient, that the success they get on paper really is gratifying, is making them a healthy, whole individual, and that they still aren't on the brink of leaving once they get into industry or even after they've put in 5, 10, 15, 20 years within a career field. So any thoughts about the conceptual model? We also try to use language that just may be appealing to our demographic group. But again, just being cautious about our labeling of students and not thinking that at any point in time these students will stay in these categories permanently, or that if they're in the category in your specific class, that will be true in another engineering class. So it really depends on context. They can move within these categories on any given day under different circumstances, but I always assume the best. And so I would assume most of my students are Buoyant Believers, and at times things are causing them to drop into the other categories. And so if I am looking at it with the glass half full, I can move them back up into the Buoyant Believers category. And I believe it's my job to do so. I do not leave them waddling in the water, assuming it's their fault to put on a life vest or to stop themselves from drowning. So again, any other thoughts? That is a picture of Dr. Stringhorn and 3 other Black men I was proud to graduate with before I left Ohio State. So just giving a brief shout out to them.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead, Carlo.
In this framework, are you thinking, is this aimed mostly at thinking about undergraduate students or graduate students, or is it just kind of across the board?
So I'll go directly into the methods to answer that question. So currently, I've only interviewed undergraduate males in engineering or related engineering field. I think it could have potential to go to the graduate level. It could have potential to go to community college level, K through 12 level, maybe even industry. I haven't explored those, but I think it would be great, if I did or someone else looked across, the pathway and pipeline that exists.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions so far? Okay, so also, if you're wondering, the conceptual model was developed purely, at least in the way I've used it, through qualitative research lens. One-on-one interviews with students. I haven't done any large, surveys, statistical analysis. So really diving deep into the lived experiences of individual Black men. Again, trying to challenge monolithic views of Black men that they're all the same. You look at this picture of some of my current and former Embry-Riddle students who are Black men. And I see a lot of diversity even within that group, you know, style, personality type, height, weight, again, where they're from, the way they speak, the degrees in which they pursue. So much diversity, even within the Black male experience, even within engineering. So making sure that we see that and we recognize it. And then lastly, just talking about how we develop the code. So constant comparison method, meaning you may find like high level things and then you dive deeper. You see if those things still exist. And then if so, you may have a new thing that emerges. You may go even deeper. So you're constantly like starting high, digging deep, coming back out again. So that's really what we're doing across participants, across interview transcripts, trying to find high level things. All right, so that's it in a more simplistic manner in terms of the methods. One more activity to hear your thoughts and feelings is going to be with the title, right? So why I'm calling them bruised. So what do you think the word bruised means when you hear it? Again, what does the word bruised mean when you hear it? And what do you think I mean within the context of engineering? So why am I calling these Black men bruised? They are successful. You'll see in just a moment, all three of them have graduated. All right, so why are they bruised? And is that even a problem? Like, should we just come out of engineering with quote unquote battle scars or bruises and that's just necessary, it's expected? You know, we're men, we're tough, we're rugged, men don't show pain, men don't cry, right? Military background with engineering. Is it just that, you know, no pain, no gain, strongest survive? The military culture being a part of engineering as well. So what does it mean to be bruised? And again, is that problematic or is that just to be expected? So I'm seeing people talking about pressure, trauma, scars, past damage, hurt, feeling attacked, just being tired, disillusioned, thought of as a lost cause, still functioning but changed, rough time, present impact from past situation, academic failures, just feeling jaded, frustrated from misunderstanding, yet still functional, worn out, demoralized, mental and emotional wounds, burnt out. These are all great. Dying, I guess, figuratively speaking, hopefully not, you know, in a physical sense, but certainly that could be the case for students. We don't talk enough about mental illness and the effects of it. Underestimated. Constantly having to prove yourself. Yep, I mentioned that prove them wrong theory. So mental health for good of grades and success. Yes, having a fortifying mental health for good grades and success. Life-changing experience. Systemic racism. So I'll go ahead and go back to the presentation again. You can continue to share your thoughts and compare them to the findings that are going to start to come out. All right, so again, you can listen to the findings. I will say that all three of the participants I'm going to highlight today are Ohio State engineering alums. They were bold enough to disclose their full names, even show their faces. All right, so they're showing a certain level of vulnerability, and they are doing that really to try to make a positive impact for the future. So I applaud them on doing that. Many times in research studies, we give general depictions of people in terms of their demographic group, their age, the type of university they attended. But again, these individuals are being bold, they're putting themselves out there, and they want you to know who they are, they want to be heard and seen. And so we'll start with Derek. Derek is from West Africa, immigrated to the United States in elementary school. Always loved engineering, had an uncle who was an engineer, always wanted to be an engineer. Had never encountered racism, at least in the way we define it here in the United States, until he came. And so it was a culture shock for him. All right, he mentions in elementary school, seeing himself and a family member in a picture. I don't know if you've had a photographer take a picture from like a roof and you see the people on the ground below. He and his family member were the only people of color, only Black people in that picture. That's when he first was like, oh, this is different. And then he talks about AP classes. And the reason I'm showing AP, even though it's K through 12, is as a part of that engineering pipeline. And so if something happens there, it could certainly stop a Black male student from matriculating into an undergraduate engineering course. And so he talks about being the only Black person in a circle of white people, and how he's saying, obviously it just happens as if it's a norm, right? When you're the only Black person there are some blatantly racist things going on, right? And so I would argue, you know, and I could have Derek potentially do the same, but I'm going to argue that some of the things he's talking about, even those AP classes, exist into college, into industry, right? Even if he's not being quoted as saying it, because at the time of this interview, he was a senior in undergrad, I would imagine these experiences are going, again, up the pipeline. And then he's just saying when you get to college, it just makes it that more interesting that you've seen this, you already know it exists, then you're in these spaces where it's occurring again. So that's Derek, bruised by racism, right? Successful, graduated, even has, he told me, 1 patent already approved, another patent pending, working in industry as an engineer. So on paper, it looks successful, but bruised, right? I think at times we don't even like to reflect back on some of these experiences because you can cause yourself to re-experience trauma, right? To sit here and have to think back on what it was like to be a Black man in engineering at Ohio State, you know, again, you can be opening up wounds. And you can ask Derek, because he's an alum, whether he would recommend a student comes to Ohio State. You can ask Derek, because he's an alum, whether he would donate to Ohio State. I'm not sure. I'm not going to speak on his behalf, right? But again, successful on paper, but at what cost? What bruises did he encounter? And would he want someone else to encounter the same thing? Right. Then we can move on to the next person. Charles, again, putting himself out there with his image. So Charles and Derek were actually a part of NSBE, something else I should say, National Society of Black Engineers. I provided some mentorship to both individuals, and Charles specifically was assigned to me as a mentee when I was in graduate school. Charles was one of the only Black in general, so Black international, Black domestic engineering students in aerospace at the time. So one of the only, started off that way, graduates, I believe, as the only Black student. Charles grew up in the Midwest, Chicago, Illinois. You know, had a lot of difficulties growing up in that area. Great family background, but Chicago, even before today's time, was still known for, you know, gangs, violence. And so he's having a fight just to ride the subway. Charles also was good in basketball. Fortunately, because Charles was good in basketball, he got to transition from urban schools that did not have good funding, good academic, you know, opportunities, to a Catholic school that did. All right, and so he talks about that transition. And so for Charles, what would it have been like if he wasn't gifted in basketball and given opportunity to go to better schools? And why did he have to be gifted in basketball to have an opportunity to go to better K-12 schools, right? In terms of higher education, Charles wanted to become a pilot, but Charles couldn't afford to become a pilot. Ironically, at the time, Charles knew about Embry-Riddle before me, right? Because I remember when I said I was interested in going there, that was a dream school of Charles's. But again, he could not afford it. And even at Ohio State, when he thought about becoming a pilot, could not afford it. So he chose aerospace engineering instead. Charles is currently working in the automotive industry, rising up very fast in corporate America. But he talks about coming in confident. He was also resilient, again, based on growing up in a city like Chicago, again, great family structure, confident, resilient as a result. But early on, he's getting crushed. So again, why? Why? If we understand self-efficacy, why are we crushing students' confidence from the beginning? Why do we believe that a weed out culture is okay? Why is it fine to tell a student, look to the left, look to the right, only one of you will be there at graduation? Those things, we need to question them, right? We need to wonder what it's doing to bruise and hurt our students, even those who on paper are successful. Charles also talks about a lack of sleep, lack of social life. He even goes to the point of mentioning, like, wondering if he was depressed, right? And so I mentioned the effect of self-efficacy, the effect of learning, the effect of academic performance, if you aren't able to maintain a high emotional, psychological state. And this is not Charles's own doing. He just wanted to succeed in engineering. He just wanted to do well. He wanted to go on and do the things he had dreamed of from a young age. And so why is he having to devote 24/7, 365, or at least 24/7 academic calendar year to aerospace engineering as the only Black man, right? So if you're in there by yourself, you can't socialize with other Black men. Now, somehow he found a way to do that through NSBE. Right? But what if NSBE didn't exist? What if the Minority Engineering Program didn't exist? What if the Bell Fellows Center for Black Men didn't exist? And why is he having to seek that space out on his own? Why isn't it built into the support system within engineering? Why doesn't he have a Black faculty member? Why didn't the College of Engineering assign him a mentor? Why did I have to do that through NSBE? You know, so questions we have to ask ourselves. I'm going to ask a lot of questions today. I'm not going to offer all the solutions that you may be looking for. I'm just going to ask a lot of questions and maybe we can brainstorm solutions. So again, 2 bruised individuals so far, successful by all means and measures. You know, Derek, successful, immigrated to the U.S., working in industry as an engineer, graduated from Ohio State, the Ohio State, as many of us like to say. Picture in the background of the shoe, still in my home, you know, office. You know, proud of these type of institutions. But again, at what cost? Same for Charles. And I'll go to the third, Michael Barnes, who also wanted to put himself out there, you know, proud to do it. And I'll say from Michael, you know, he grew up in a city similar to Charles, wasn't Midwest, Southeastern, DC area, rough, you know, resilience as a result of that. You know, confident, did well in all his K through 12 schools. Didn't even have access to calculus in high school, but made the best of that situation. Didn't have access to dual enrollment, still made the best of that situation. You know, notice a lot of his peers not having role models, not having the family structure that he and Charles and Derek had, but still came to college, confident, resilient. You know, he is talking about the sacrifices. So because Michael is probably the most outgoing of all 3 of them, to an extent, Derek is pretty outgoing as well, was NSBE president at one point in time. Michael was in a fraternity. And so because he wanted to socialize, because he wanted to see Black men, be around Black men, the cost for him is a lower GPA. And why is that the case? Why should his GPA have suffered? Because he wanted to socialize with people who look like him, because he wanted a well-rounded experience, as he talks about in the paper. He didn't want to come to college and just experience his major. He wanted a full experience. And Ohio State has a lot to offer in that area. You know, formerly known as a party school, not necessarily the point now, but still a breadth of extracurricular activities, great football, great sports. Why can a student not come major in engineering and experience all of that, be well-rounded without their GPA suffering? He actually had a job, you know, after school, but ironically, Michael was no longer in engineering. And he mentioned that engineering is still something that, you know, has helped him in terms of the way he thinks, the way he operates, but he's doing things with real estate now. He thought about doing things with like a shoe company. He actually got a master's degree, or I shouldn't say a master's degree, MBA. I know it's different than a master's degree. So he wanted to expand himself. And he actually recommended that engineers be able to do that at the undergraduate level. There is more focus on business, entrepreneurship, things that make them well-rounded individuals. But you'll see for him, the bruises really were GPA and having to, what he called, weather the storm. And so the question I'll pose there is that storm something we're creating? You know, things happen. Even in my time here as a faculty member, my wife has been ill at times. She lost her father. I've lost aunts. I've lost a grandmother. Those things, you could argue, are outside of our control. Even though you could look at systemic racism and see its impact in society and say, well, maybe our Black family members would have lived longer. My wife wouldn't have got sick if she weren't Black, or if she weren't born in a certain zip code, if she had access to healthcare and Black female doctors on the same level that other, you know, people in society have. So part of that storm may be unavoidable. Other parts are deeply embedded in society. And then within engineering, what storms are we creating? So these Black people are already having to deal with systemic racism outside, right? And then they come to engineering, and are we creating additional storms for them? And I live in one of the storm capitals of the country, you know, Central Florida, known for thunderstorms, known for hurricanes. I've evacuated at times, haven't been forced to, but I felt the need to. But again, do we create storms in engineering, and is that a problem? So I'll really stop there, and I'll start to, you know, take thoughts on recommendations, and then I can point you to different places where I've offered them through my writing, but I don't want to, you know, be the sole person who brainstorms solutions here. You are at Ohio State. I haven't been there as a student in 5 years. You know, I think you are brilliant. You don't have to be Black to be intelligent or have solutions that can positively impact Black students. Black students didn't create these issues. Black faculty like myself didn't create them. You know, Ohio State was formed and founded shortly after Black people were released from enslavement, you know? So what has been rooted deeply in our structure? What solutions exist to try to help Black people thrive and not just survive, specifically Black men in engineering? So I'll open it up for thoughts, reactions. I appreciate your attentiveness. Definitely having to, quote unquote, lecture a little bit more than I would like in the virtual setting. So any thoughts or ideas of recommendations, improvements, or just reactions? Create a stronger student community.
just going to mention, I think one of the biggest issues is the fact that it is, often one Black student, or two, or maybe three, and even in a big class. That it seems, it just seems, I think creating a strong student community is a great thing, but it's a challenge when when we don't have that many Black students in engineering. So that if we can address that problem, then I think, the other problems, the other solutions would get a little bit easier. I think if we can really just, increase the numbers of Black students and minority students in general in engineering.
Yeah, it looks like along those same thoughts, someone said more effort into reaching out to elementary, high schools, and culturally diverse areas to generate interest. I will just say that many people don't realize, and the NSF used to publish this, so you can look under, if you like Google women and minorities in science and engineering, they have statistics, but it showed that coming in, Black students had very high interest in engineering. So it wasn't a lack of interest for those who at least come into our pipeline. There are definitely many who are outside of our pipeline who are not exposed. And so I'm not gonna, say that that's not a good argument. So there are many students who are never exposed to engineering, but those who get into our pipeline, compared to their peers, they do have high interest level. And so we have to see what's going on, despite the interest, despite even success, which I showed here for these Black men and people like myself. So what else can we do? What is part of our admission criteria? ACT, SAT scores, which for decades have been shown to be biased towards low-income students, students of color. Are we still using those as a metric? GPA, how much does that matter? It is the most viable predictor, but that's only for early success, like first year, So how much value is in it? Class rank. If I'm forced to go to crowded urban schools, can I have as high of a class rank as someone going to a smaller suburban school? Does that create biases? So we really have to look at our admission criteria, look at our outreach centers. Is a minority engineering program the only responsible unit for it? And are they well funded and supported? More representation in faculty, or other thoughts that are coming up, working on being a mentor for a population, not just assuming Black students can be mentors, but other students doing that as well. I'm not assuming the student isn't Black, but just saying that's the case. Marketing engineering to students and commit to retention of those students. And that actually is coming from Charles, one of the research participants, so happy to see him on here. Workload is far too high. So people advocating that it should be a 5-year program and funded as a 5-year program. What can we do to actually see people as humans? I think that's a great perspective there. Who else isn't in this seminar? But even those here can start providing good solutions. Standardized testing, definitely been documented. The weed out culture, so keep the great responses coming. More effort to just encourage opinions from individuals who are quote unquote underrepresented in engineering. These are all great ideas. And to assume that we don't already have people who can come up with these ideas, sometimes we're not even asking. I've never been asked as a Black male faculty member why I went to Embry-Riddle. And I'm not saying that to take a shot at my institution, but I've never been asked why I went there from any administrator. I've never been asked why I've stayed. I haven't been asked why I chose Ohio State, from current administrators. I've never asked why I stayed, why I graduated. And so if we want more people, when are we going to start collecting stories of those who have gone through? Similar to what I'm doing by interviewing them. So other thoughts or reactions? Yep. Teaching and growing people, not just curriculum. So we're talking about different organizations like JobSpark, mentoring programs, having different icebreakers to expose students to different people. OBAP is another great organization. It's called the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals. So that's another great organization, not just NSBE for Black students. Partnerships potentially between those organizations, and even SHIP, SWE, helping students transition into college, especially if you come from an under-resourced community. Any other reactions, thoughts, recommendations? Having more diversity programs. And so large institutions like Ohio State, they typically have minority engineering programs, sometimes diversity programs. What about smaller schools like mine? You know, are we intentional about partnering with Columbus State or our regional campuses to make sure they have minority engineering programs or support structures? What about creating mini versions at, you know, Columbus Public Schools or some of our suburban schools? Having more metro high schools. Why is there just one high school that has a heavy partnership with Ohio State? Why aren't there more metros? Ohio State is a huge campus, one of the biggest in the country. Columbus is growing in size and scale. You know, there's no reason why we can't have more. I mentioned the goal of starting a K-12 STEM school. Would someone try to hire me to come back to Ohio to do so? You know, would Ohio State invest in people like me? Those are questions, you know, and I'm not the only one. And so how many people are out there with dreams that really kind of point to the title of A Raisin in the Sun? A Raisin in the Sun comes from Langston Hughes' poem about a dream deferred. What happens to it? It's like a raisin that dries up in the sun, right? So how many people have dreams deferred? Going into engineering, continuing to rise up, you know, going into industry, becoming an entrepreneur, becoming a faculty member, starting schools, and the dreams are never realized. So keep the recommendations coming. There's a lot of great ones here. Look to the left and the right. Yeah, we need to get rid of that type of mentality. Again, having mentors, public schools, and free education. So definitely a lot of people advocating for free education. I know that can sound like a political discussion, but I would say if it's about, you know, just supporting humans, I don't think it should be tied to politics. Investing in and really valuing the work of specific faculty and staff members and students, I agree with that. Not just being an expectation for P&T, but it's actually rewarded, it's highly valued. And then even at large schools, the money doesn't really match the efforts, the time that's necessary. Teacher training, especially in terms of empathy. So these are all great, great points. And one reason I wanted to offer this time and opportunity is I don't profess to be an expert. I don't really like the term expert, to be honest with you. I think I'm someone who's passionate about this topic. I've studied this topic, but I think the term expert can speak to privilege at times, because there are many people who've never had opportunity to be a faculty member like myself. Many people who've never had opportunity to become an engineer. And so I lean away from expert, and I think expertise, you know, again, takes interest. It takes a lot of hard work and time. And so I've certainly tried to put in my share, my fair share, if I could add to that. But I don't want to be labeled an expert, because I understand there are many people who are brilliant, who are self-educated, people who are brilliant, who again just are denied access to these spaces. Students included, so I appreciate the students who are chiming in or brave and bold. Looks like Brian, you may have something you want to add. Or if not, maybe your mic accidentally was activated. All right, looks like it was an accident since he muted himself. I'll go back to the chat. So again, more about diversity programs, more concentrated with both the home university as well as surrounding schools. And I think for Ohio State being a public, you know, land grant institution, that would be a great mission effort there. ABET requirements. I do have some critiques of ABET, you know, in terms of what they're recommending and expecting of us. And not assuming that ABET is like, you know, the Bible, that it's truth and it should be followed to a T, or our curriculum is, you know, truth and it should be followed to a T. Where are the flaws? Where are the challenges? What can we do to improve it? Okay, so I'll go back and just show you some references in case you want to take a look at them. And so I mentioned 2 papers, so you can find them on my research team site. And so my website is just LeroyLongIII.com. If you go to the tab that is for my research team, or continue the website by just doing /EASE, EASE, for engineering, arts, and sports engagement, you'll see this banner at the top. And if you scroll down, there are tabs for engineering, arts, and sports. Click on engineering, there are papers and infographics. So first one about Buoyant Believers is here, and there's a paper as well. Another one about lessons learned from successful Buoyant Believers is here. There's also a paper that you could look at. Recently, I had an opportunity to publish a guest editorial in the top journal for engineering education, the Journal of Engineering Education. It talks about creating anti-racist engineering classrooms. So you can take a look at those. There are also 2 other guest editorials I would highly recommend within this current issue. And a paper that talks about the correlation between having women of color as faculty members in engineering and then having women of color as students. So a lot of great resources you can take a look at. So other ideas, email contact, I'll show that as well. Yeah, review of policies and practices. I think that will be great. Also, just looking at power dynamics. And so what type of power exists within, an individual dean? Do they have the opportunity to, decide what chairs get retained and not? How much power does that individual dean have? How much power does the president of the university have? Is it shared? Do faculty have say some input? Do students get to decide what leaders they would like to retain? So I think we have to be careful about, again, shared governance, about power dynamics. Those things come into play as well. But if you want to contact me, my email's here, my website is here, again, showing my Twitter, but also my website does show other social media. I have a YouTube channel if you want to take a look at it. I guess this video at some point will probably be posted there. So other just thoughts, reactions, discussion items. I know Carlos may be able to transition us into like a 30-minute discussion. I don't know if you had anything in mind for it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Professor Long. This is a really engaging, outstanding, thought-provoking. So, we appreciate the time. We do welcome, since it's 4 o'clock, we'll kind of wrap up the, official seminar hour, but we wanted to have this half hour afterwards, basically just to continue the discussion, but also would welcome, we would love students to stick around and just have it as an opportunity for students to get to know Professor Long a little bit more, get to know, a little bit more about his career path and sort of how he's progressed through his successful career. And yeah, just continue the discussion in a little bit more informal way. So yeah, if there's no other questions or comments, we can transition over to this more informal. Of course, faculty and staff are welcome to stay as well. But we wanted to have this time for the students to get a chance to get to know Professor Long. So thank you, everyone. Yeah, we appreciate everyone coming and the engagement, and thanks again, Professor Long, for outstanding seminar.
Thanks for the opportunity.